Welcome back to the Vanished Lands. The cliff rises sharp against the sea, its face carved by centuries of wind and storm. On top of it stands a broken skeleton of Whitby Abbey. The arches are jagged like the teeth of some giant beast, waiting to bite into the sky. Clouds drift low and heavy, their shadows crawling across the ruins. Below, the North Sea crashes against the rocks, restless and cold. Seagulls wheel above the towers, their cries harsh, like restless spirits calling across time. Those who climb the steep steps that lead to the abbey find themselves staring at a place that feels alive. The stones are silent, but the silence is not empty. It is a silence that watches, a silence that remembers. The question rises with every gust of sea wind. Why here? Why does this ruined abbey on the edge of England feel so haunted, so full of weight? Why did this place give birth to one of the most terrifying legends the world has ever known? The ruins are more than stone. They are the cradle of Dracula. To stand before Whitby Abbey is to feel history pressing close. Not the clean history of dates and kings, but the darker history of whispers and fear. The abbey is not just ruin walls. It is a scar left by battles, by storms, by centuries of prayer and plunder, by legends too heavy to fade. Each arch that still stands leans toward the sea, as if listening to secrets hidden beneath the waves. Once, this place was whole. Once, monks filled the halls with hymns. Yet now, the same arches echo only with the wind. The gulls dive and rise, circling like guardians of something no one dares touch. The ruins seem broken, but there is strength in their jagged frame. They do not fall. They endure, and in that endurance lies a mystery. Travelers arrive at Whitby and feel it before they see it. A pull, a shadow, a kind of warning that rests in the air. The town below is charming, with narrow streets, fishing boats, and voices of market sellers. Yet above it all, high on the cliff, the abbey looms. Its sight turns every story darker. People pause when they look up because the abbey changes the color of the town. It takes light and bends it. Children grow up here, hearing tales. Some say the abbey's windows glow at night when the moon is hidden. Others whisper that shadows walk the cliff, even when no person stands there. Visitors may laugh, but laughter fades the longer one stares at the broken towers. The abbey looks down at the sea as though it commands it. The waves below crash as if obeying some unseen order. Sailors long ago marked this place on their charts, not only for the cliffs but for the fear. Ships that steered too close were swallowed by rocks hidden beneath the water. The abbey's shadow was the last thing many saw. Legends grow where fear lives. And Whitby Abbey has always been more than a ruin. Its broken form sparks something in the human mind. The sight of it is not easy to forget. Those arches against the storm do not feel like the remains of stone. They feel like a warning. Imagine a man walking alone up the steps at twilight. The path grows narrow, the stones worn smooth by centuries of feet. The sound of the sea grows louder with every step, but so does the silence above. When he reaches the top, the first thing he sees are the broken windows of the abbey. They gape open like empty eyes. Behind them is only shadow. The man feels small. He feels watched. He wonders how ruins can make him tremble more than any living city ever could. Whitby Abbey is not only stone, it is story. The kind of story that lives inside ruins and cannot be buried. Centuries of battles, raids, prayers, and silence carved themselves into these walls. The ruins stand as proof of all that passed, but also as something more, something that breathes. When the sun sets, the abbey turns darker than night itself. The stones no longer reflect the last light. They swallow it. The wind pushes hard against the cliff, carrying the taste of salt. Those who look up from the harbor see the abbey glowing black, an outline of jagged teeth against the sky. For a moment, it feels less like a ruin and more like a monster crouched above the town. It is easy to understand why this place fed a story like Dracula. Every shadow here has a voice. Every broken wall feels like a door that leads somewhere unseen. Even silence feels like breath. This ruin is not quiet. It is waiting. Visitors who come here speak of strange feelings. Some feel cold, even on warm days. Others sense movement from the corner of their eyes. There are stories of footsteps heard on nights when the abbey is empty. Dogs howl when led near the ruins, pulling away as though the stones themselves whisper danger. And always, the sea below keeps pounding against the cliffs. The waves never stop, as if they are answering some rhythm set long ago. The sea and the abbey belong together, both endless, both merciless, both watching. Why here? Why Whitby? The answer begins in these ruins. The abbey did not simply inspire a novel. It offered the world a shape, a face, a hunger. Out of these stones rose the image of a vampire that would never die. The world's greatest vampire was born in the shadow of Whitby Abbey. But the Abbey's story is not only about fiction. It is about power. Power that lingers in ruins long after the builders are gone. Power that holds the eyes of strangers and refuses to let them look away. Power that waits for night. On stormy evenings, the cliff becomes dangerous. Lightning cuts across the sky, and the abbey flashes in brief, blinding light. Each strike makes the ruins look whole again for an instant, like the abbey has returned, filled with some ancient life. Then darkness falls, and the abbey is broken once more. But in that instant, the mind wonders, perhaps the abbey is not ruined at all. Perhaps it is only hiding. The sea roars louder, the wind lashes a cliff, and those who stand there feel it. A fear that has no source but lives in the blood. The abbey does not need words. Its shadow speaks. Its ruins tell a story that birthed a legend. The world knows Dracula as a work of imagination. Yet imagination needs a place to live. Here on this cliff, in these ruins, imagination found a body. The abbey was more than a setting. It was a seed that grew into a monster known across the globe. Every ruin has a story. But Whitby Abbey's story is not finished. The broken teeth of its arches still bite at the sky. The cries of the gulls still sound like lost souls. The sea still claws at the rocks below. And the silence of the abbey still presses on those who climb to see it. The question remains in every heart that looks upon it. What lives in these ruins? What truth lingers in their shadow? And why did this place, above all others, give the world a creature that never dies? The abbey waits, and the story begins here. The beginning of Whitby Abbey reaches back to a time when the world itself felt closer to shadow than to light. It was the 7th century, when kingdoms of early England were carved not with gentle hands, but with fire, blood, and faith. High on that cliff, where the sea never rests, stones were lifted into place to build a house of God. It was not yet the ruin people see today. It was strong, proud, and new. Yet from the moment the first prayers were spoken, there were whispers that this holy ground was never fully at peace. Monks walked its halls, cloaked in silence, their steps soft against the stone floors. They lived by discipline and prayer. But even the most devout could not close their ears to the storm. For here, storms did not simply pass. They clung to the cliff, thundering night after night. Lightning would strike, splitting the sky wide open. And in those violent flashes, the abbey's arches seemed to transform. They did not look like gateways of heaven. They looked like doorways into something else, something beyond human reach. The monks prayed harder, their chants echoing through the walls as if to drown out the wind. Yet the abbey itself seemed to resist their voices. Some nights, hymns rose in strength, only to be swallowed by the roar of thunder, as if the storm outside wanted to silence what was being said inside. Villagers from below began to speak quietly of strange sights. They claimed the abbey glowed when struck by lightning as if alive. Some swore they saw shadows moving across the windows when no lamp was lit. Others whispered of figures walking the cloisters long after the monks had gone to rest. These were not the shadows of men, they said, but something else. Shadows that lingered even when the light had vanished. The monks themselves carried heavy eyes. They rose before dawn, prayed, studied, labored, and prayed again. But behind the solemn discipline was unrest. In the writings left from those days, there are signs of fear, accounts of monks waking in the night, hearing whispers they could not trace, words spoken in no tongue they knew. At first, they called it dreams. But when more than one described the same voice, the same rhythm in the dark, they began to wonder if the abbey stones had absorbed something older than their prayers. One record, written in trembling hand, spoke of a monk who refused to enter the chapel after sunset. He claimed that when the lightning struck, he saw a figure standing near the altar, tall, unmoving, cloaked in shadow. When the light faded, the figure was gone. Others laughed at him, told him it was his tired mind. Yet 2 weeks later, that monk vanished. His bed empty, his robe left folded, his sandals still at the door. He was never seen again. The Abbey's leaders forbade talk of such things. Their word was law, and they demanded silence. To question the Abbey's sanctity was to question God himself. But silence is heavy. The more it is forced, the louder the whispers become. Storms continued, wild and endless. Every flash of lightning etched the Abbey in white fire, and with each flash, shadows seemed to twist and crawl. Pilgrims who came to Whitby felt the unease. They arrived seeking blessing, but many left with restless dreams. Some swore they felt watched as they knelt in prayer. Some woke to find scratches on their doors, though no hand had touched them. The Abbey's ground felt holy, yet never safe. There are tales of rituals done in secret. It is said that certain monks, fearful of the voices, began to mix their prayers with older words, words not found in any holy book. They believed they could bind whatever haunted the Abbey with chants older than the Abbey itself. No one admits this openly, of course, but the hints remain in scraps of writing that survived. Strange symbols carved in margins, names written backwards, prayers that look more like spells. Whether these monks sought to protect the Abbey or to summon what lay within, no one can say. But from that time onward, the Abbey's reputation grew darker. Travelers arriving in Whitby often found the Abbey shrouded in mist. Even in daylight, its towers seemed to vanish into fog. It stood like a vision, half real, half dream. Some said the monks themselves had grown pale and strange. Their eyes distant, their voices heavy, their steps slow as if weighed down by unseen burdens. To the villagers below, the Abbey was both sacred and feared. They honored it, yes, but they did not climb to it without reason. The cliff was not just a path of stone. It was a crossing into something few dared to touch. Imagine the nights when storms raged hardest, lightning striking so close that the very walls shook, thunder rolling until the air itself seemed to tear apart. In those moments, the Abbey was lit in blinding white, every arch and tower outlined against the storm. For an instant, it looked not like a church, but like a fortress guarding the edge of another world. And then darkness, the vision gone, replaced by shadow, silence, and fear. The monks endured, but endurance does not erase unease. They continued their prayers, their fasting, their chants at dawn. Yet the shadow of the Abbey grew heavier with each passing decade. Stories began to spread far beyond Whitby. Pilgrims spoke of the restless air, the stormlit arches, the whispers in the night. And slowly, a question took shape. Was Whitby Abbey truly blessed ground, or had it been built on a place that could never be tamed? There is one tale of a monk who confessed near death that he had seen figures moving through the Abbey at night. Not just one, but many. He described them as silent forms, gliding where no man should be, their faces hidden, their bodies dark. They drifted between pillars as if searching for something. He tried to confront them, to speak, but no sound left his mouth. The next morning, when others checked, they found nothing. Yet he swore until his last breath that the Abbey was never empty. Something always walked its halls. The Abbey of the 7th century was meant to be a light of faith. Yet faith flickered here, never steady. Holy ground, yes, but holy ground that never felt safe. Every prayer carried an echo that did not belong. Every hymn seemed answered by the storm. And every shadow hinted that the Abbey was not alone. When people today look upon the ruins, they see only stone. But those stones were once alive with these beginnings. Monks walking in silence, storms crashing above, shadows falling too heavy for comfort. The Abbey was not yet the ruin it would become. But even in its birth, it carried unease. Seeds were planted here. Seeds of fear, seeds of legend, seeds that would one day grow into stories darker than prayer. This is where Whitby Abbey's shadow began. Not in destruction, but in creation. The moment the first stones were lifted onto the cliff, the air shifted. The sea crashed louder. The storms grew heavier. The whispers began. And though centuries have passed, the feeling remains the same. Holy ground, but never safe. The 9th century was a time when the sea brought not only trade and travel, but terror across the horizon. Sails would appear like dark wings rising from the water. To the villagers of Whitby, these sails were not just cloth and wood. They were omens. They meant the arrival of Vikings, fierce raiders who carried with them fire, steel, and scorn for all that was holy. The abbey, proud on its cliff, stood as a beacon of faith. Its towers could be seen from far across the waves, a symbol of prayer and devotion. But symbols draw enemies as much as allies. To the raiders who cut through the sea, the abbey was a challenge, a prize, a place where they could strike not just at men but at the heart of belief itself. When the first raid came, the storm was already building. The monks heard the crash of waves but thought little of it. The sea was always restless. Yet soon, the cries of gulls were joined by a different sound, the beat of oars, steady and strong. The horizon darkened with ships. Dragon heads carved at their bows cut through the water, their eyes staring at the cliff as if they already knew what awaited them. The monks prayed, their voices rising in fear. Bells rang out from the tower, echoing across the town below, calling for help, for warning, for mercy. But no mercy came. The raiders climbed the steps like wolves, scenting blood. They broke through the abbey's doors, steel in hand, fire in their eyes. The stones that echoed with hymns now shook with screams. Monks fell where they stood, their robes torn, their prayers silenced. The raiders showed no respect for sacred. They mocked it, laughing as they cut to the halls, overturning altars, shattering crosses, spilling blood across the stones that had been meant for peace. What they left behind was not only ruin, but a curse. Survivors spoke of it in hushed voices. They said the raiders had not just killed, they had desecrated. They mocked the prayers as they struck, calling upon their own gods in strange tongues. Some claimed they spat on holy books before casting them into the fire. Others whispered that one raider, drunk on blood, smeared his hands across the abbey walls and declared the place damned forever. When the raiders finally left, the abbey was not whole. Its walls still stood, but the spirit inside was broken. The survivors gathered the dead, but not all bodies could be found. Some were lost in the chaos, dragged away, or hidden beneath the rubble. Others seemed to vanish, leaving only bloodstains on the stone. Without burial, the monks said the souls could not rest. They would wander, unanchored, tied to the abbey not by devotion but by rage. From that time onward, the abbey was no longer only a house of God. It was also a place of ghosts. Villagers spoke of figures moving through the ruins at night, their robes dark with blood, their faces pale with sorrow. They said the screams of that night never faded, only repeated themselves in whispers when storms struck the coast. The abbey's holy ground had been mocked, and that wound never healed. Some monks tried to bless the place again, to wash away the stain. They prayed, they fasted, they lit candles to the dead. Yet no matter how long they prayed, the air did not lighten. The abbey remained heavy. Like a man carrying grief he could never set down. Travelers who came to Whitby in those years often described the same feeling. They spoke of dread when they climbed the steps, as though the stones themselves remembered. One pilgrim wrote that he felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, as if soaked in memory. Another said he dreamed of blood the night he stayed near the abbey, though no one spoke of it to him before. The reputation grew. Whitby Abbey was no longer simply a place of prayer. It was a place where faith had been mocked, where blood had soaked the stones, where shadows had taken root. The Viking raids had not only scarred the land, they had changed it. Legends formed quickly. Some said the spirits of the dead monks guarded the abbey, punishing any who dared to mock it again. Others believed the raiders themselves left pieces of their souls behind. Trapped by the curse, they spoke in their laughter and defiance. Children were told to stay away at night, for voices rose from the ruins, calling in tongues no one could understand. Storms grew worse in those years. Lightning would strike the abbey more often, as though heaven itself had marked it. Each strike lit the walls in ghostly white, and villagers swore they saw blood running fresh across the stones, though rain washed them clean in moments. The abbey became a mirror of fear. What people believed, they saw. And what they saw, they carried into new stories. For the monks who remained, life was not the same. Their prayers were sharper, heavier, edged with desperation. They carried the memory of their fallen brothers in silence. But silence cannot hide sorrow. Some of them began to break, their minds clouded by visions of that night. They confessed to seeing faces on walls, hearing footsteps behind them when no one followed. They dreamed of the raiders, their axes red, their laughter loud, coming again and again. In this way, the Abbey's haunted name began, not from fiction, not from imagination, but from the weight of real blood, real terror, and real loss. People remember what had been done here, and memory itself became a ghost. The Abbey's arches, once symbols of prayer, now felt like the open mouths of the dead. Its halls, once filled with song, now echoed with silence that pressed on every ear. Holy ground, but scarred ground. Sacred stone, but stained stone. The curse of the Viking raid did not fade with time. It lingered, weaving itself into every story told of the Abbey. Even centuries later, when the ruins stood in their broken form, the whispers remained. Blood had touched these stones, and the stones remembered. And so the Abbey carried a new shadow. Not only the shadow of storms or whispers in the night, but the shadow of blood spilled where prayer once rose. It was the blood of monks, of faith mocked, of spirits left without rest. The Abbey began to live in the imagination as a place not only holy but haunted, a place where the line between past and present blurred, where every storm, every cry of gulls, every flicker of lightning seemed to call back that night when the stones turned red. The Abbey did not fall to ruin in that century. It stood, rebuilt, and endured. But the reputation began here. People no longer looked upon it as only a beacon. They looked upon it as a scar. And scars hold memory. Scars tell stories. Scars never let you forget. That night of blood became part of Whitby Abbey forever. And those who walk its grounds, even now, cannot shake the sense that the stones beneath their feet are not only stone. They are reminders. They are witnesses. They are soaked in memory that will never fade. The Abbey stood tall, but it was never the same again. The story of Whitby Abbey carries many shadows, but one of the most enduring is the tale of the ghostly nun. To this day, people in Whitby still whisper about her presence, wandering the ruins with a face hidden in hands as cold as the sea wind. Her figure is said to glide across the broken stones in silence, as if she belongs not to this world but to a place between. And from the moment her story first spread, she became both a warning and a mystery. No one knows with certainty who she was. Some say she lived centuries ago, a nun who broke her vows of silence and prayer. Others claim she was punished by her own order, buried in shame, and left to walk forever as a reminder. The Abbey does not give answers. It only offers a sight of her drifting form, pale in the moonlight, her veil hiding all but the faintest outline of her face. The villagers told their children never to follow her. That was the first rule. If you saw her moving through the mist, you were to turn away, no matter how strong the pull. For she did not walk as others walked. She did not turn her head, did not speak, did not stop. And yet, she seemed to beckon. A tilt of her body, a slow glide toward the arches, a soft pause near the cliff. Something in her silence drew people in. Children, curious and bold, sometimes ignored the warnings. They whisper among themselves that they would climb the steps at night to see her. Some said they wanted to know what lay under her veil. Others said they wanted to touch her hand, to feel if it was truly as cold as the sea. But the stories tell us that those who tried never came back. The parents in Whitby spoke firmly to their children. If you see her, do not follow. If you hear her, do not answer. If she reaches out to you, do not touch her. It was not just a lesson of fear. It was a rule of survival, because the Abbey had already claimed too many souls in its storms and raids. To follow the nun was to risk vanishing without trace. There are stories of fishermen who saw her from the sea, high above on the cliff. They swore her figure stood at the edge, looking down with her face hidden, her veil lifted by the wind. Some even claimed they saw her step forward, yet she never fell. Instead, she seemed to melt into the mist gone before their eyes. The fishermen crossed themselves, praying quickly and rowed harder to shore. What makes her tale so haunting is not just the image of her wandering the ruins. It is the question of why she lingers. A nun's life was bound in duty and faith, yet something chained her here, even in death. Some say she broke sacred vows, perhaps by falling in love with another. Others say she witnessed horrors during the Viking raids and could not rest after what she saw. There are even whispers that she chose to end her own life on the cliff, and because of it, she was denied peace. The abbey itself does nothing to silence these tales. Its ruins invite them. The long windows gape open like watching eyes. The arches cast shadows that shift with the moon. The wind howls across the stones in tones that resemble cries. And so her story grows stronger with every telling, carried not only by voices but by the atmosphere of the place itself. Those who claim to have seen her often describe the same feeling. First comes a sudden chill, not the normal cold of the sea wind, but something deeper, sharper, that cuts through cloak and skin and bone. Then comes the silence. Even the gulls quiet. Even the waves seem to still for a moment. And in that silence, the figure appears. A woman in pale robes, veil drawn, drifting as if her feet never touch the ground. She does not run. She does not float away. She simply moves with the patience of eternity, and those who watch feel their breath catch in their throats. Some witnesses say she lifts her hand, not in anger, not in threat, but in something softer, almost like invitation. And this is where the danger lies. For to take her hand, they say, is to vanish. Those who do are lost, not to death that leaves a body, but to some other place entirely. The abbey's haunted reputation grew quickly because of her. People no longer feared only storms or shadows. They feared the nun herself. Her story made the abbey into more than a ruin of stone. It became a place alive with spirit, a place where a single figure could hold power over the living. And whether she was real or only a vision of imagination, no one could deny how strong her presence felt. The psychological weight of her story is heavy, for she does not chase. She does not scream. She does not strike. Instead, she waits. She waits in silence, knowing that curiosity is often stronger than fear. She knows people wonder what lies behind her veil, what lives in her gaze, what her cold hand would feel like. And in that wonder, she finds her victims. Some skeptics say it is only superstition, that children vanish by falling from the cliffs, and people blame the ghost to cover their grief, that storms and mist created illusions, and a mind painted a nun upon them, that tales of a cold hand were only the touch of night air. But even skeptics admit, there are too many stories, too many sightings, too much shared detail. The abbey seems to feed her legend. Its walls catch the moonlight in ways that create figures where none exist. Its arches frame the night sky, so that shapes appear where shadows fall. Its silence is so complete that the mind begins to fill it with whispers. And once the tale of the nun is known, it is hard to walk the ruins without expecting her to appear. Visitors from far away have written of her. Travelers carried her story to other lands, telling of Whitby's ghostly nun who drifts in silence and steals away the curious. Even in distant places, her name brings a shiver, because she is not like the monsters of blood and teeth. She is quiet, patient, inevitable. Her presence is the kind that stays in the mind. People walk away from Whitby Abbey and find themselves looking back, half expecting to see her at the cliff's edge. They wake at night hearing the sound of a veil brushing across stone. They dream of her hand reaching out. Even those who never saw her begin to feel she is near. That is her power. She exists as much in thought as in sight. The story of the ghostly nun lingers because it touches something human. The fear of what lies hidden. The pull of forbidden curiosity. The question of what happens to souls who are not at peace. And the warning that some mysteries are not meant to be followed. The Abbey has many scars, from storms, from raids, from time itself. But none cut deeper into the human imagination than the figure of the nun. She is not the loudest ghost, nor the most violent. Yet she is the one people remember. The one who waits in silence, veiled and patient, forever part of the Abbey's shadow. And when the night falls over Whitby, when the waves rise and the mist curls around the ruins, it is her figure that people fear to see. A pale shape drifting among the stones, face hidden, hands colder than the sea wind. waiting for another soul to follow. The 19th century was an age of travel, discovery, and restless imagination. Cities grew crowded, trains pushed through the countryside, and stories spread faster than ever before. Yet even in that age of science and progress, people hungered for mystery. They sought out legends, superstitions, and tales that stirred both fear and wonder. It was in this time that a man named Bram Stoker walked into the story of Whitby Abbey. Stoker was not yet the famous writer he would become. He worked in theaters, he managed actors, and he wrote in the hours left to him. But his mind was never still. He filled notebooks with ideas, scraps of lore, fragments of nightmares. He was a man searching for something, a story powerful enough to outlive him. And one summer, in 1890, his search brought him to Whitby. He arrived in the town as a visitor. Like many others who came to breathe the sea air, the harbor welcomed ships from distant lands, its streets alive with fishermen, traders, and travelers. Yet it was not the charm of the town that captured him most. It was what loomed above it. High on the cliff stood the abbey, broken and vast, its arches rising like a crown of shadows. Stoker looked up at it and felt the pull that generations had felt before him. He heard the gulls cry as they circled the ruins. He saw the sea smash against the rocks, restless and eternal. And in that moment, something took root in his mind. The abbey was not simply stone. It was atmosphere. It was power. He climbed the 199 steps that lead from the town to the cliff. Each step carried him higher, each step heavier with anticipation. Locals had walked these steps for centuries, but for Stoker, they were more than stone. They were a journey into another world. By the time he reached the top, the wind struck him full in the face, carrying salt and mist. He looked upon the abbey and stood silent. It is said that he carried a journal with him, and there, against the weight of the sea and the ruins, he wrote furiously. Words spilled across the page, not neat, not polished, but alive. He captured the sight of the abbey, the feel of the wind, the silence that pressed between the cries of gulls. He noted details of the town, its streets, its harbor, its graveyard near the cliff. He saw in them not just scenery, but story. For it was here that the seeds of Dracula began to grow. Stoker did not invent the vampire from nothing. Legends of the undead walked through many cultures before him. Stories of spirits rising from graves, of blood drinkers, of night creatures were old as time. But Whitby gave him something different. Whitby gave him a setting of frame, a stage upon which the monster could live. In his novel, The Demeter, a ship from Russia runs aground at Whitby's shore. Its crew vanish. Its captain is found lashed to the wheel, and a black dog leaps from the wreckage, racing toward the abbey. Readers of his time felt the shock of it, the dread of a foreign evil arriving on English soil. But those who knew Whitby felt something more. They recognized their own town in every word. The graveyard Stoker visited, perched on the cliff near the abbey, appears in his novel almost unchanged. He described the tombstones leaning under the wind, the grass bent by storms, the sea roaring far below. He walked those very paths and carried them straight into his pages. Literature detectives later traced passage after passage, finding the footprints of Whitby across the novel. Yet what Stoker gave was more than description. He gave the abbey a new shadow. He tied its ruin to a creature of deathless hunger. He turned its arches into watchful eyes, its silence into the breath of the vampire himself. He transformed Whitby from a coastal town into a place where the boundary between life and death, history and nightmare grew thin. It is said that Stoker was inspired by tales he heard in the library, local stories of shipwrecks, of ghostly sightings, of superstitions carried across the sea. He wove them together with the ruins that towered above him, and in that weaving, something eternal was born. Dracula would not only be a story of a monster, it would be a story rooted in place. And that place was Whitby. The abbey, already burdened with centuries of raids, storms, and whispers, now carried a new weight. It became the birthplace of a legend that spread across the world. Readers from London to New York, from Paris to Berlin, would see in its ruins the shape of fear. They would imagine the vampire rising from the earth of Whitby's graveyard, his shadow falling across the town below. Stoker left Whitby, but Whitby never left his book. His notes carried the sights and sounds of the town into the heart of his writing. And once the novel was published, the town itself became immortal in the minds of readers. Tourists came not only for the sea, but for the story. They climbed the same 199 steps, looked upon the same abbey, and felt the same unease that Stoker had felt. What is most haunting about this moment in history is how naturally it unfolded. A man seeking rest stumbled upon a ruin that spoke louder than words. A writer searching for story found one written already in stone, in sea, in storm. And by putting it to paper, he gave the abbey a new identity. No longer just a ruin of monks and raids, but the cradle of Dracula. Today, scholars trace the lines of his novel with care. They compare his descriptions to the town itself. They find exact matches. The East Cliff, the winding streets, the harbor, the churchyard. They speak of how Stoker's imagination was not only invention, but transformation. He took what was real and made it eternal. And yet, even beyond the scholarship, there is something deeper. For those who stand at the top of the steps, the wind fierce and the abbey looming, it is easy to imagine Stoker standing there, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the ruins. It is easy to see the moment when the idea of Dracula, half-formed, began to breathe. The abbey gave him more than inspiration. It gave him atmosphere, the kind that clings to the mind and refuses to fade. The kind of atmosphere that makes people lower their voices, that makes children shiver, that makes even the boldest pause before the cliff's edge. Stoker felt it, wrote it, and passed it on to the world. The story of Whitby Abbey gained another layer in that century. It was no longer just haunted by its past. It was now haunted by its future, by the monster it gave to the world. And that monster would outlive its maker, would spread far beyond the cliffs, would seep into film, theater, art, and music. Yet always, when people trace Dracula back to its roots, they find Whitby. They find the steps, the sea, the graveyard, and the abbey. Bram Stoker arrived as a visitor. He left as the keeper of a legend. His footsteps up the 199 steps became the footsteps of literature itself, climbing into a story that would never die. His journal pages became scripture for a new myth, one born of mist, storm, and ruin. And Whitby Abbey, already steeped in centuries of blood and whispers, found itself crowned with something darker, a shadow that stretched not only across the cliff, but across the whole world. The shadow of Dracula. The sea around Whitby has always been restless. Waves crash against the cliffs as though trying to tear them down, and the fog rolls in thick and heavy, swallowing ships whole. For centuries, sailors feared these waters, not only for the rocks and storms, but for the stories told in hushed voices. Stories of ships that sailed without crew, vessels that drifted like ghosts across the horizon. It was here, in this place of fog and wrecks, that the most famous ship of them all arrived, the Demeter. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Demeter is a Russian schooner that runs aground on Whitby's shore. Its crew vanished without a trace. Its captain is found lashed to the wheel, dead but still guarding his ship, and from its wreck leaps a great black dog, racing toward the abbey's shadow. For readers, it was one of the most terrifying passages of the novel, the arrival of the monster himself. But for those who knew Whitby, the scene struck a deeper chord, because tales of ghostly ships were already a part of the town's memory long before Stoker put pen to paper. Locals whispered of vessels drifting in silence through the mist, ships with sails torn but never sinking, their decks empty yet their core steady. Fishermen spoke of seeing lanterns swinging on these ships, though no hand carried them. Some swore they heard voices calling out across the waves, cries of a crew forever lost, trapped between storm and eternity. And when the fog cleared, these ships were gone, vanishing as if they had never been. Stoker must have heard such tales. He was a man who listened, who collected scraps of legend and turned them into something lasting. Perhaps he heard the sailors speak of these phantom vessels. Perhaps he stood at the harbor and imagined what it would look like. A ship appearing through the fog, silent, unstoppable, cursed. And from that vision, the Demeter was born. But the story does not end with fiction. For long after Stoker left Whitby, sightings continued. Storms rolled in, and with them came reports of strange shapes in the water. The fog would break for a moment, and there it was, a dark outline sails tattered, gliding with no sound of crew or chain. Some said these were tricks of light, illusions cast by mist and fear. But others believed they were the souls of lost sailors, forever doomed to wander the sea. The wreck of the Demeter in Stoker's novel feels more than imagination, because Whitby had always been a stage for such mysteries. The harbor is a place where fact and legend overlap, where the line between real and unreal blurs like the horizon in a storm. Was the Demeter simply a creation of Stoker's mind, or was it the echo of tales that had drifted through Whitby for centuries? Storms on this coast have always carried a strange quality. They rise sudden, with winds so strong that time itself feels broken. Sailors spoke of hours lost, of journeys that should have taken days but seemed to end in moments. Some even claimed they had seen the same storm twice, as if the sea had folded upon itself, carrying them back into what had already passed. It is here that the Demeter's tale takes on a strange, almost otherworldly edge. The storm that carried the ship to Whitby in the novel is described with unnatural force. Lightning that split the sky again and again. Waves that seem too high, too strong for any human vessel to endure. It is almost as if the ship was not only crossing sea but crossing something else, as if the storm itself was a portal, bending time, bending fate, delivering Dracula not by accident but by design. And when the Demeter finally struck Whitby's shore, it was not a wreck like others. No scattered wood, no bodies washed up on the beach. Instead, it came with silence, mystery, and dread. A captain tied to the wheel with his own hands, eyes open but lifeless, an empty deck, save for the cargo that carried death, and the black dog vanishing into the ruins above. To this day, the people of Whitby speak of that scene as though it was part of their own history. They know it is fiction, yet it feels more real than many facts. Because Whitby has always had its ghost ships, and Stoker only gave them a name. The Demeter became the symbol of every strange sighting, every fog-bound vessel that slipped into the sea's memory. The blend of fact and fiction here is what makes the story so powerful. Stoker did not need to invent every detail. He only needed to listen, to watch the waves, to hear the whispers of the harbor. The rest was already alive in the minds of those who lived here. By placing Dracula's arrival in Whitby, he tied the supernatural to a place already soaked in legend. There is a strange thought that lingers when one considers the Demeter. If storms are indeed more than storms, if the sea can bend time and open doors, then perhaps the ship was not just a vessel of fiction. Perhaps it was a symbol of something deeper, of the way the sea swallows men and gives back only shadows. Perhaps the Demeter is every ghost ship ever seen, every cry ever heard in the fog, every lantern that swung with no hand to hold it. Whitby holds its silence on the matter. The waves continue their endless song. The fog continues to roll in heavy, and from time to time, someone still claims to see a vessel drifting out at sea, a black shape, unmoving, gliding through the mist. They watch it for a moment, and then it is gone. The power of the Demeter's arrival lies in its mixture of truth and invention. It feels like memory, even to those who never lived it. It feels like a story passed down, half believed, half feared, and that is what makes it unforgettable. Bram Stoker's words turned Whitby's storms into something larger than weather. He turned them into portals where the natural and the unnatural meet, where a ship can arrive with no living soul, where time bends under the weight of waves, where the sea itself becomes a stage for a horror. And so, every time the fog creeps in thick and the sound of the sea grows louder, people glance toward the horizon and wonder, will the ship appear tonight? Will the Demeter return, sliding silently into the harbor, its deck empty, its captain tied to the wheel? Or has it never left at all, still drifting in the mist, forever circling Whitby, forever bound to the shadow of the abbey above? The town keeps its eyes open. The sea keeps its secrets, and the story of the Demeter remains a tale of storm, shadow, and silence, born from both fact and fiction, alive with every crash of the waves. In the heart of Whitby lies more than its harbor, its cliffs, or its abbey. Hidden away, locked in archives and shelves that smell of dust and salt, are pages that whisper stories older than Bram Stoker, older even in the memory of many storms. These pages are fragile, their ink faded, but their words remain sharp enough to cut through time, and what they reveal is unsettling. reports of figures that walked the night, long before Dracula was ever written. The Abbey has always drawn eyes. Pilgrims, travelers, raiders, and writers all looked to it and saw something. But within the records of Whitby are details that refuse to rest. Manuscripts speak of shapes that move where no person should be. Witness accounts describe creatures not of flesh, but of shadow. They're called many names. But one phrase appears again and again: night-stalking figures. Imagine the unease of reading those words in ink written centuries ago. The monks who held the abbey wrote them not as legends, not as fancies, but as records. Some were notes and margins, warnings to brothers, words scratched quickly and hidden between prayers. Others were longer, almost confessions, as if the writer needed to put a fear out before it consumed him. One fragment tells a monk who walked the cloisters after sunset. He described the air as heavier than stone, his breath short, his steps slow. Then he saw them, two figures gliding through the courtyard. He swore they cast no shadows, though the moon shone bright. He did not approach. He froze, closed his eyes, and prayed until dawn, when he returned to write it. He called them night stalkers, and said their silence was worse than any sound. Another record speaks of a villager who claimed to see a figure watching from the abbey's broken window. It stood there for hours, unmoving, until the lightning struck and revealed the frame empty. The villager insisted it was not a monk, not a man, but something else. The account was written down not as story, but as testimony. So the question rises, was Dracula only a novel, or was it a retelling, in coded form, of what Whitby already feared? Bram Stoker walked into Whitby in the 19th century, but Whitby's fears were older. He found notes in the library, read accounts of shipwrecks and sightings. He carried them into his story, shaping them into fiction. But what if the line between fiction and record was thinner than we think? What if the vampire of his novel was not an invention, but a figure already seen, already written, already whispered through centuries of fear? Literary detectives have long studied Stoker's notebooks. They see where his pen borrowed from Whitby's archives. They match his descriptions to the town, the graveyard, the abbey. But beneath that lies something deeper, the possibility that he stumbled on truths disguised as history. He was not the first to write of shadows moving where they should not. He was not the first to record figures that fed on fear. He was only the first to give them a name that the world would never forget. The abbey itself becomes more than ruin in this light. It becomes evidence. Its stones are not just relics of prayer, but witnesses of something unexplainable. They stood when the monks wrote their accounts. They stood when villagers trembled at the sight of shadows in the windows. They stood when Stoker climbed the steps and filled his journal. Each arch, each wall is part of the record. Some who study these archives argue that the accounts are superstition, born of fear and storm. They say tired monks imagined figures in the dark. They say villagers mistook mist for movement, lightning for shadow. But even they cannot ignore the consistency. Centuries apart, different hands describe the same thing: tall, silent figures that walked at night, cold as death, without shadow, without sound. Others see these writings as warnings, not mistakes. They believe the abbey was built on ground already marked by something older, that the monks themselves felt it and tried to record what they could without breaking their vows of silence, that the abbey did not create the legends but revealed them, drew them into its walls, and trapped them there for all who followed. There's one story buried in these records that chills even the skeptic. It tells of a child lost near the abbey. Searchers found no body, no trace, only a small handprint on the wall, darker than stone, as if burned there. The record ends without answer, but the mark was said to remain until the wall itself fell centuries later. Was it only grief recorded as horror, or was it something more? The library holds these fragments, waiting for eyes brave enough to read them. Each page is like a piece of a puzzle that will never be complete. The words shift between history and nightmare, between record and myth, but together, they weave a picture of Whitby not only as a town of sea and stone, but as a place touched by shadows that no storm could wash away. And so the abbey is not just ruin. It is archive. It is memory. It is evidence carved into stone and ink, a testimony of centuries of unease. Stoker gave those shadows a body and a name. But the shadows themselves are already there, written by hands long gone, preserved by those who could not explain what they saw, but dared not forget it. To walk the Abbey with this knowledge is to walk in two worlds, one of stone and history, one of shadow and story. Each arch is a doorway, each wall a page, each ruin a witness. And whether one believes in superstition or not, the feeling remains that the Abbey does not simply stand. It watches, it remembers. The cursed library Whitby is not only a collection of books and papers, it is the Abbey itself, holding centuries of whispers in its walls. It is every note written in trembling hand, every account of night stalkers, every myth passed in silence. It is proof that Whitby's story did not begin with a novel. It began with shadows walking in the night. Shadows that never left. Shadows that still cling to the ruins above the sea. The ruins of Whitby Abbey rise like broken giants against the sky. Even in daylight, the arches cast shadows that twist across the ground. And when the sun begins to sink, those shadows grow sharper, longer, stranger. Visitors often pause and stare, because for a moment, the lines of stone do not look like simple ruins. They resemble teeth. The Abbey's tall arches stand like fangs biting into the horizon. It is here that the stories shift from history to something deeper, the human mind. The Abbey does not need ghosts or legends to unsettle those who climb the steps. Its power lies in what it awakens inside. Psychologists who study fear have argued that places like Whitby Abbey hold a grip on us because they speak to something ancient in our nature. They are not merely ruins of stone. They are reminders of what we fear most: isolation, death, eternity. When people walk among the ruins, they feel small. The arches tower above them, like jaws waiting to close. The vast open windows feel like eyes that see through skin into thought. The silence between the walls is not calm but heavy, pressing, unkind. These reactions are not accidents. They are part of the architecture of the human brain. For thousands of years, humans feared caves, forests, and dark places where predators might hide. The Abbey, though built by men, seemed to echo those same shapes and shadows. Its arches gape like mouths. Its towers rise like fangs. Its corners hide like caves. We may not always notice it consciously, but our bodies respond. Heartbeats quicken. Breathing grows shallow. And so the Abbey feeds, not on blood, but on the human mind. Visitors have written of this feeling again and again. They describe being watched, even when no one else is there. They speak of footsteps echoing where no person walks. They tell of standing in the open courtyard, yet feeling trapped, as though the walls lean closer with every moment. Some call it imagination. Others swear it is something more. But all agree, the Abbey carries a presence that never leaves. One woman wrote that she felt a gaze follow her as she moved. She turned, expected to see another tourist, but the space was empty. She hurried to leave, but the feeling did not vanish until she reached the last step at the bottom of the hill. Only then did the weight lift from her shoulders. Another visitor spoke of hearing whispers, though he was alone. They were not words, but low sounds, enough to chill him to the bone. Even in bright daylight, the Abbey commands unease. The light falls through the arches in strange patterns, creating shadows that move as the clouds pass. For a moment, a dark form may seem to shift across the wall. For a moment, a window may appear filled with something that is not there. And once the thought takes hold, once the mind begins to search for movement, everything feels alive. At night, the effect is stronger. The moon cuts the Abbey into sharper shapes, black and silver, jagged against the sky. The arches resemble fangs more clearly, and the shadows stretch across the ground like reaching hands. The sound of the sea rises from below, endless and unkind, a reminder of eternity. In such a setting, even the bravest admit they feel watched. Psychologists suggest that this feeling comes from the design of the ruins themselves. The tall windows frame the sky in ways that resemble eyes. The arches create long, narrow paths that resemble corridors of traps. The broken towers create angles that confuse the sense of space. In short, the Abbey unsettles the senses, and the mind fills the gaps with fear. Yet, while science explains part of it, science cannot erase the experience. To feel watched is to feel watched whether or not reason denies it. There is also the weight of memory. People know the Abbey's past, the raids, the curses, the stories of ghosts. That knowledge lies at the edge of thought, ready to rise in moments of silence. A gust of wind through the arches becomes the breath of a figure. A cry of a gull becomes a voice. A shadow cast by stone becomes a presence. The Abbey does not only stand above the sea, it stands inside the mind, shaping what we see and hear. Children sense it most quickly. They grow uneasy, pulling at their parents' hands, begging to leave. They cannot explain it, yet they feel it with clarity. Dogs, too, are said to react, howling at the ruins, their ears flat, their bodies trembling. Animals do not read books. They do not know history, yet they respond. Perhaps they hear the wind differently, smell the salt more sharply, sense vibrations that humans ignore. Whatever it is, their unease adds to the weight of mystery. There is also the question of eternity. The Abbey has stood for centuries. Empires have risen and fallen. Wars have raged and ended. Yet the Abbey remains scarred but unbroken. To stand before it is to feel time itself pressing down. The ruins remind us that we are small, brief, fragile. They remind us of death, not in words but in stone. And death is the deepest fear of all. This is the psychological grip of Whitby Abbey. It does not need to move or speak. It does not need to show a ghostly nun or a phantom ship. It simply stands, and by standing, it reveals our fears to us. Fear of being watched, fear of being trapped, fear of being forgotten, fear of never escaping. Writers have long been fascinated by this grip. Some call it the sublime, the mix of beauty and terror that makes ruins powerful. Others call it the uncanny, the strange sense that something familiar has become unfamiliar, that stone arches can look like fangs, that windows can look like eyes, that silence can sound like breath. Whatever the name, the effect is the same. The Abbey does not let go. And so, even after leaving Whitby, many visitors carry the Abbey with them. They dream of its arches, its shadows, its silence. They recall the feeling of eyes on their back. They remember the weight of standing in a place that seemed alive though it was only stone. They may laugh about it in daylight, but when night falls, the memory stirs again. This is why Whitby Abbey has lasted not only as ruin, but as legend. Its power is not only in its history or its stories, but in its ability to reach into the human mind. It makes people feel what they do not wish to feel. It makes them face fears that lie deep, hidden, but never gone. And once those fears are touched, they cannot be forgotten. The Abbey preys not on blood, but on thought. Not on the body, but on the mind. It feeds on imagination, on silence, on the shadows that our own eyes create. And that is why it endures. That is why it continues to haunt. To walk through Whitby Abbey is to walk through one's own fears. To see its arches is to see fangs. To stand in its silence is to feel death. To look at its ruins is to face eternity. And that is its true power, not the ghosts, not the legends, not the stories. The Abbey itself is the ghost. The Abbey itself is a legend. The Abbey itself is a story. Each year, as autumn rolls over the cliffs of Whitby, something remarkable happens. The quiet fishing town transforms into a gathering place for thousands dressed in black. Boots strike against cobblestones, lace and velvet flutter in the sea wind, and painted faces gleam pale under the fading sun. They come from every corner of the world, men and women, young and old, drawn not only by music and fashion, but by something older. They come to Whitby Abbey. The ruins that once echoed with monks' prayers now rise above a festival devoted to darkness. The Whitby Gothic weekend, often called the Dracula Festival, is more than celebration. It is ritual in disguise. For a few days, fantasy and reality merge. The Abbey becomes a stage, a backdrop where myths are reborn, where imagination spills out of books and into life. Thousands climb the 199 steps, boots clattering where pilgrims once walked in silence. At the top, black umbrellas bloom like dark flowers. Corsets tighten, jewelry glints like drops of blood. Music echoes through the town, mixing with the cries of gulls and the crash of the sea. Whitby, once a quiet harbor, becomes a carnival of shadows. At first glance, it is play. People dress as vampires, ghosts, and creatures of night. They laugh, pose for photographs, sip wine, and dance under the arches of the abbey. But look deeper, and the line begins to blur. When hundreds of figures in black gather beneath those broken windows, when chants rise with the music, when torches flare in the wind, the abbey feels alive again. The stone arches catch their voices, carrying them into night like echoes of old rituals. Detectives of history have asked a chilling question. Are these festivals truly harmless? Or are they, unknowingly, continuations of something older? Rituals disguised as theater, gatherings that awaken what was once feared? The thought is not far-fetched. Centuries ago, monks spoke of shadows moving the abbey, of whispers heard at night, of figures that drained peace from the air. Villagers warned of a nun whose hand was as cold as the sea. Sailors swore of ghost ships drifting in the mist. These tales never faded. They grew stronger when Bram Stoker came, when Dracula took root. And now, each year, thousands return to replay the story. They dress as the very creatures Whitby feared. They raise their arms where monks once prayed. They gather by torchlight where shadows once moved. It is as though imagination itself has become fuel. The abbey does not need blood. It feeds on thought, on fear, on memory. And what stronger offering could be given than thousands of minds united in the same vision of darkness? Every costume, every song, every chant becomes a thread in a web that tightens around the abbey, binding it not to the past but to the present. Visitors who attend the festival describe moments that feel stranger than play. Some speak of silence falling suddenly, even while music plays. Others feel a hand brush their arm, though no one is near. A photographer once swore that when his flash lit the abbey's arches, a pale figure appeared in the corner of his frame, a woman veiled, staring directly at him. When he looked again, the corner was empty. Is imagination? Perhaps. But imagination has power. Psychologists say that the mind creates reality in part. What we believe, we begin to see. And in Whitby, where centuries of stories already weigh on the air, belief is stronger than most. The abbey itself seems to respond. During the festival, lights are cast upon its ruins, painting them in crimson and shadow. Fog drifts across the stones, artificial and real, blurring the edges of the night. From a distance, the abbey looks whole again, glowing with life. Yet it is not the life of monks, but the life of myth. The abbey becomes a cathedral of darkness, a stage where Dracula himself might walk. For some, this is celebration, a chance to embrace mystery, to live for a night in a world of fantasy. For others, it is unsettling. They watch from the edge, seeing thousands reenact shadows that once terrified. They wonder if the abbey is only smiling at the game, or if it is drinking it in. There is an old belief that attention is a kind of offering. To give thought to a place, to speak of it, to imagine it, is to give it strength. If that is true, then Whitby Abbey has become stronger than ever. Once, only monks feared it. Then, villagers whispered of it. Later, Stoker wrote of it. But now, thousands gather each year, dressed in black, chanting its legends, breathing life into its shadows. What curse could be stronger than that? The detective's question lingers. Are these gatherings harmless? Or is the abbey, through them, fulfilling its oldest role, feeding not on bodies but on minds? There is something striking in how natural the ritual feels. The crowd climbs the steps together, like a procession. They gather in black robes and pale faces, like mourners at a funeral. They stand beneath arches shaped like fangs. They light fires, drink, sing, and dance in the ruins. And when the night grows late and the sea roars louder, the abbey seems to lean closer, as if listening. The town of Whitby accepts it, even thrives on it. Shops filled with black dresses, silver jewelry, masks, and books of Gothic lore. Hotels filled with visitors. Restaurants buzz with voices. But beneath the celebration, there is unease. Some townsfolk say the festival has changed the abbey, that the ruins feel heavier after each gathering, that shadows linger longer, that silence grows deeper once the crowds leave, as though something has been stirred. It may all be coincidence. It may all be play. Yet when thousands of people reenact the same story year after year, we're in the face of darkness, chanting beneath ruined arches, one must wonder, Does imagination stay only in the mind? Or does it seep into stone, into sea, into the very air? Whitby Abbey stands, as it always has, high on the cliff, battered by wind and storm. But each year, it gains a new layer, a new memory. The Dracula Festival has become part of its identity. It is no longer just a ruin of history. It is a living stage where myth and reality meet. And in that meeting, something powerful stirs. When the last festival goer leaves, when the last torch dies, when the last boot steps down the 199 steps, the abbey stands silent once more. The sea crashes below. The gulls cry overhead. The ruins wait, as they always have. But within them now lie the echoes of thousands of voices, united in the shape of the same story. A story of darkness, of hunger, of eternity. And perhaps, just perhaps, the abbey smiles in its silence, for it has learned across centuries that it does not need to demand attention. Attention comes willingly. People gather year after year, feeding it with thought, with fear, with imagination. And imagination, more than blood, is what keeps curses alive. The Dracula Festival is not just a celebration. It is a reminder that Whitby Abbey is not finished, that even as ruin, it lives, that every costume, every chant, every gathering is another layer added to its legend, and that legends once fed do not die. The ruins of Whitby Abbey rise high above the restless North Sea. The stones are broken. The arches stand open to the sky. Yet the power they hold has never faded. Centuries of storms have clawed at them. Lightning has split the night above them. Salt winds have struck them again and again. Still they remain. Silent, unyielding, eternal. The monks are long gone. Their prayers no longer echo through the cloisters. Their chants, once strong, are now only whispers in the imagination. The Vikings who spilled blood across these walls are dust. The nun who wandered in silence belongs to memory. Bram Stoker himself lies buried, his hand no longer writing, his voice no longer telling. Yet the abbey continues to breathe. What remains is not only stone. What remains is legend. Every shadow that falls across the arches carries memory. Every gust of sea wind seems to carry whispers of stories too old to name. Every storm is a reminder that some places never rest. Travelers stand at the cliff edge and feel it. They look up at the ruins and sense eyes upon them. They hear the gulls cry overhead, but beneath it, they imagine voices. They take photographs, they smile, they laugh. Yet when they turn to leave, they glance back one more time, unable to shake the thought that something unseen is watching. And when the night is stormy, when the sea rises and the sky splits with lightning, some say the abbey is no longer empty. A dark figure walks the cliff, cloak whipping the wind, unmoved by the storm. It does not speak. It does not turn its face. It only moves with the patience of eternity. In that figure, some see a monk who never left. Others see the nun who still searches for peace. But many whisper the same thought. It is him, the Count, the one Stoker wrote of, the one who may not be fiction after all. The abbey becomes more than ruin in these moments. It becomes a question. Was Dracula only a story, written by a man with a talent for fear? Or was it something older, something already alive in the stones of Whitby, waiting for someone to give it a name? The answer may never be spoken, but the feeling is clear. Whitby Abbey is not only history. It is not only ruin. It is a place where fear and imagination meet, where stories walk as shadows, where silence is heavier than words. And as long as the abbey stands, whether as ruin or as memory, the legend will never die. Children will hear of the ghostly nun. Sailors will still whisper of ghost ships. Visitors will still feel eyes on them as they wander the grounds. Scholars will still trace Stoker's words back to the 199 steps. And when storms rise, when the sea howls, when the wind tears across the cliff, someone will always swear they saw the dark figure standing there, cloak moving like a living shadow. This is the grip of Whitby Abbey. It outlives prayers, blood, curses, books, and men. It feeds on memory. It feeds on imagination. And it reminds every person who stands before it that some places are never just places. Some places are eternal. The Abbey is not finished. It continues with every story told, with every visitor who climbs the steps, with every mind that dares to wonder if fiction is really fiction. That is why people return, not just to see ruins, but to feel what cannot be explained, to stand before silence that feels alive, to look at arches that resemble fangs, to face the thought that the Count's home was never in a castle far away, but here, on a cliff above the sea. If you listen closely, the Abbey itself seems to ask the question, was Dracula ever only a tale? Or was Whitby Abbey always his home? The story is yours to carry now. If you felt the shadow of the Abbey as you listened, if you sensed the weight of its silence, share this tale with others. Let the ruins live again through your voice. Like this story, leave your thoughts and subscribe so you never miss the legend still waiting to be told. For the Abbey is not done, and neither are the stories that rise from its eternal stones.